Are we streaming? I think we might be. Okay. Let me make sure this launches. Looks like it did. All right. So, welcome back. Welcome. If you are new, we're going to talk about global heating and climate change. Actually, I can leave these on. Sorry. I know they reflect the light. It can't be helped. It can't be helped. I just have a different type of glasses, I guess. And this morning, while I was baking granola, I was listening to this video by Yale Climate Connection. They do pretty good work. I don't think I've had many criticisms of Yale Climate Connection that I don't have with other channels that are trying to do science education on climate change, which is what they call it. It's not really climate change, it's really global heating, but once again, they're doing the best they can. So Yale Climate Connection comes on, and I'll flip to picture-in-picture here in a minute. Can a colossal extreme weather event galvanize action on the climate crisis? And this is something I've wondered about myself. I think the answer, the long answer, meaning in the distant future, might be yes. But in the near term, the answer is no. And that's not even a spoiler. If you kind of don't know that right now, then you've got to get to grip with this, okay? There is no near-term event possible that could galvanize people basically through fear, okay? They could make people so afraid that they would storm the capitals of the leading nations of the world, storm the capitals demanding action on global heating. Well, of course, they demand action on climate change because they've been conditioned to do that. And I just want to say right away, the climate crisis, climate action, climate change, whatever. If that's what you're going to storm the Capitol demanding because you just got frightened, right? It's going to be really easy for them to say things like, well, the climate changes all the time. What are you worried about? I mean, if you're worried about the climate, we'll have a new climate next year. We'll have a different climate 10 years from now. What climate do you want? How can we even give you the climate you want? What can we do about this? This is weather, okay? If you go charging up the steps of the parliament and you're demanding action on climate change, they're just going to look at you like you're children because you're talking about the weather. And nobody can control the weather because, the climate is the sum total of your weather. You understand that, right? You have heat waves and deserts. You have a desert climate. Why do you have a desert climate? Because you have lots of heat waves. Heat waves are weather. Climate is what you get. You live in a rainforest. Okay, your climate is it rains all the time. All of a sudden there's rain and there's floods and people's homes are being washed away. And you say, "Oh, Irma Gerd, we must do something." Well, you live in a rainforest. It rains all the time. The rain is your weather and the rainforest is your climate. What do you expect us to do? So, and you won't have an answer to that because there is no answer. They've already framed the question. And this title of this video, okay, I'll switch now. I'll switch to screen share. The title of this video just reinforces the error that you're going to commit when you go to your politicians and you demand climate action or climate justice or climate this or climate that. It's just not going to work. I'll tell you that right up front. Your problem isn't with your climate. In fact, if your climate didn't change, let's say your climate stayed exactly the same, you would still have problems with global heating. Why is that? Because one, it's global, and two, it's hot. And global heating is caused by physics. And the physics is driven by, the physics of global warming is driven by excess CO2 in the atmosphere. And where's that CO2 coming from? The burning of fossil fuels. And where are the fossil fuels coming from? They're coming out of the ground. And why are we burning them? Because we must. And how are we going to stop doing that? You can't. And the problem I have with this video, can a colossal extreme weather event galvanize action on the climate crisis? He actually comes to the same answer I would have. The answer is no. The answer is no. So, I guess we're done here. I agree with this guy completely, except I don't. Remember, it takes a lot of time to do these things. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you like my work, I've got a link in the description for my Buy Me a Coffee portal. Buy me a coffee. I really appreciate it. And give some feedback, of course, that people are paying attention and that they care about the content. So back to this. I brought up the transcript for this, and I am going to fast forward. The format of the video is, I'll just leave it here for a minute. The format of the video is that he gives some examples of severe weather that no one cared about. Even though just severe weather events like Superstorm Sandy that came ashore in Manhattan and New York and caused, I don't know, $100 billion in damage, certainly $10 billion. Katrina that, killed hundreds of people, and these sorts of things. That we've been having extreme weather. Not as extreme as we're going to have, by the way. The extreme weather we're having now is maybe a notch above the weather we would normally have. But enough so that people can even convince themselves that it's kind of normal. And if you want to say, well, no, actually, it's pretty extreme, they'll say, well, we've had extreme weather in the past. It's like, well, name one. Well, I just kind of get the feeling that, this is maybe normal. Or maybe it's not normal, but it's not so bad as you'd like to make us believe. You're sort of overstating it. So we're still at the point where people can kind of argue semantics, like, what does the word extreme mean? What is extreme? Point to one. On what basis was it extreme? The cost of the cleanup? The cost of the rebuild? Or is it the number of people that died? Or was it how long it lasted? Or, or how many inches of rain came down? Or how hot the temperature got? What number, what science are you going to throw at this? The cost, the deaths, the temperature, the rainfall amount, the winds, wind speeds. And so there's always going to be a semantic argument about what the word, I'm trying to word here, what the word extreme means. But at some point there won't be such an argument. And I promise to get to that after I've done this reaction. So I'm going to go here to the transcript, and I'm going to fast forward to a point in here where, as far as I'm concerned, he loses it. And you can, you can go back and pause and read this transcript yourself if you want. The Atlantic Ocean is changing, of course. The hemispheres are droughts and all this kind of stuff. And then he gets to this. The past few decades should have triggered climate action, should have caused a Sauron, WTF moment, when the executives of the fossil fuel industry and the politicians they helped put in power realized that Frodo was, they're doing a Sauron comparison here. I'll show you. See, they're saying the ring of power. Okay, they're comparing the fossil fuel. He is comparing the fossil fuel industries to the ring of power in Lord of the Rings, right? And Frodo is the dude who's going to stand on the edge of Mount Doom and throw the ring of power of climate doom. Why is this thing stalled? Wow, that's too bad. I hope it doesn't stay stalled. Anyway, down here a little further, he says something that should send off alarm bells anytime you hear this. None of those wake-up calls have changed the behavior of those in power. Brokers who continue to fight tooth and nail against any diminution of their power and profits, saving the planet is just not sufficiently profitable, they preach. So, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have scrolled that. Okay, I'll leave that there, and I'll come back up here, and I want to see if this moved. Okay. So what he's saying here is something that I absolutely vehemently disagree with. What he's saying is that the reason we can't have change on the climate crisis, it isn't the climate crisis, it's global heating. The reason we can't have change is because of the fossil fuel industries and the politicians whose votes they buy. Now, it is true. The fossil fuel industry is the one pulling the fossil fuels out of the ground. That's their charter. We have licensed them to do that. The governments around the world license mineral resources, areas with mineral resources for these companies to go in and privately remove the minerals, the coal, the oil, and natural gas. The nations of the world do this. And that's not going to stop. The nations of the world, the governments of the nations of the world, the governments are doing this. The fossil fuel industries aren't sneaking in on little paws, sneaking in quietly, stealthily to drill, and then they sneak out with the oil. That's not what's happening. They're going in there deep and wide, all right? They're going in there with trucks and equipment, and it's visible, and then there's spills, and everyone knows what's going on. They're not sneaking in. And once they're there for decades, doing the work they do. Everyone knows what's going on. And the governments of the world approve this. It's not sneaky. They're not being underhanded. They're supported by law, and they're doing it for a reason. And the governments of the world are permitting these private companies to do this for a reason, and it's not profits. Oh, sure, they'll make a profit. They're corporations. They have to make a profit. Without that, they can't do this great service they provide of getting these minerals out of the ground. And it's an amazing service that they're providing. And the governments of the world know that. And the politicians of the world know that. And the politicians are never going to stop that. And the people of the world practically fall on their knees every day and worship the fossil fuel companies who bring out the crude oil, among other things, and turn it into gasoline and diesel so they can drive themselves wherever they want to go. So they can have the freedom to jump on an airplane with a cheap fare and fly to see their aunt and uncle and then fly back that same afternoon. People want that. People want the airline industry. They want the shopping centers full of goods from China and Taiwan and Pakistan and every other place in the world. They want their market full of produce and wines and beers and products from all over the world, all the continents of the world, all the nations of the world will go into your neighborhood supermarket, right? Your big market. And they want this. Everybody wants this. And this guy is saying that the reason that we're troubled with a climate crisis is because of the greedy oil companies. And that is simply not correct. That is completely incorrect. We are not burdened with a climate crisis because of the oil companies. The oil companies are providing a product that every human on earth must have and are grateful to have every morning, every noon, and every night. That if they didn't have that product, they would die. That's why this is happening. It's not happening because of the greedy oil companies. And another riff on this is when people say, oh, the oil companies around the world, they're getting so many subsidies from the public coffers. All this tax money we send to the oil companies, and they just add it to their profits, and they just add it to their salaries, and and all this money we're pouring into the energy sector, and they're doing all this work, and they're making all this money and all this taxpayer money. It's like, well, what do you think would happen if we didn't send them taxpayer money? If we didn't send them money to offset the cost of their operations, which are becoming more expensive every day, you think fracking is cheap? Did you know that in the beginning of the oil boom back in 1910, the oil was under so much pressure that it would just gush out of the ground? It would just gush out of the ground. It would actually destroy the drilling machines, and under pressure, so much pressure that it would just blow the drilling machines to pieces when they hit the reservoir of oil. And that's why they call them gushers. And the first oil discoveries had to be managed. They were under so much pressure. And they came out of the ground under their own pressure. It was later, when some of that pressure was relieved, we had to put in pumping stations. They pump, but it's still a big reservoir. We put all these soda straws down into it. We just casually, slowly pump the oil out and put it in pipelines, and the pipelines go to collections, and the collections fill up the tanks, and the tanks are emptied into refineries, and then the gas and the oil and the kerosene, they all go out in the trucks to be delivered, and everyone's happy, and everyone drives, and everyone flies, and everyone has their recreational vehicles on the lake, and they have recreational flying, and we want all that. But as we've gone through the easy oil, it's become the expensive oil. We have to do fracking now. Now, fracking works, and it'll work for a long time. Well, we probably have 30 years of oil here in the U.S. alone with fracking, but fracking is expensive. The oil just doesn't pop out of the ground like a baby being born under its own pressure. You have to go in there, break the stone. Have you broken stone recently? Have you thought about that's what fracking means. It means fracturing. They are fracturing the shale, and they're injecting with pumps, injecting solvents and sucking the oil out. And, it's a high quality oil, and it's worth a lot of money, but they, cost them a lot of money to do it. And if you, the consumer, had to pay the price of fracking, If they just passed on that price to you, say, well, this barrel of oil is costing a lot more than the normal barrel of oil because we had to work really hard and we had to invent all this technology. We had to bring in all this electricity and we had to consume this electricity. And everything was a lot of work and a lot of maintenance, a lot of innovation, a lot of experimentation. Someone's got to pay for all that. So you would have to pay for it. And your gasoline wouldn't be, here in California, $4.50 a gallon. Your gasoline would be $6.50 or $7 a gallon. And so to prevent that from happening, the U.S. government, in its wisdom or whatever, sends money to the oil companies to offset that cost. And the oil used to be really cheap to get out of the ground. And now, because it's really expensive to get out of the ground and time consuming and difficult, the U.S. government offsets that expense so that the price of oil stays kind of constant. And so when you're loving your price of gas, it's still affordable, more or less. And, well, that's because of the subsidies. And when people run around and say, oh, we have to stop sending subsidies, the oil companies are fine with that. You don't want to send us subsidies? Fine with me. You're just going to have to pay for the price of all of our exploration of all of our expensive equipment and techniques, including all the research that went into this and all the experimentation that we didn't get paid for. Now you got to pay for all that because we're a company, we're a business, we're in this for the profits. And, you have to pay for that. You have to pay for our expenses. That's how corporations work. I mean, the price of an iPhone isn't the price of the materials. There's a tiny little bit of aluminum. There's a tiny little bit of plastic. If you really price the iPhone for the materials, in the silicon and the copper and the silver and the lead and all that stuff, it'd probably be $3-4. $3-4, really. And the most expensive thing would be probably the silicon, which has to be mined from quartz. And the amount of silicon in an iPhone and the chips is like 1/10 of a gram, right? And so if you have to price an iPhone, it would be $5 for the materials. But that's not the price of an iPhone, is it? Because there's a lot of manufacturing. Huge plants have to be made, and you got to pay for that. And all these materials have to be brought in, and the chips have to be made, and you have to pay TSMC to make the chips, and the chip making equipment that comes from the Netherlands or Denmark or one of those two, Netherlands, I think. That has to be manufactured. Oh, and it all has to be invented, and all the innovation that goes into that all has to be paid off. So your iPhone is $1,200 because it's fucking hard to make an iPhone. The materials are not so difficult, but making an iPhone is freaking hard. That's why.
Someone's at the entryway doorbell.
Okay, someone's at the entryway. I do have to check this. Hold on a second. That was my son. He's fine. Just saying hello. He didn't know what I was doing. So, sorry about that. I could edit that out in post-production. I might just do that. So, this guy is saying that the profits from the oil industry is why we have a climate problem, and that's just not true. Dumping. Oh, and then the. And then the fossil fuel industry are the ones dumping their waste gases in the atmosphere, thereby heating the planet. That's not true. I mean, I'm sure they do some of that. In the process of pumping oil and natural gas, there's some waste, some leaks out. But they don't want much leakage because the natural gas leaking into the atmosphere, that's money, that's product. They're supposed to be selling that. So if they have too much leakage, they're cutting into their production. The refinery process is kind of dirty, but most of the product from the oil, the crude oil, that doesn't go up smokestacks. They're very careful about that. Most of it goes into gasoline, diesel, and kerosene for aircraft. So in the end, the ones who are dumping their waste gases in the atmosphere is the end user. Now, that's you and me, driving up and down the street in the cars, but it's also the restaurants and the shopping centers and the the guy in the diesel truck delivering food to your supermarket. And it's the supermarket that uses electricity from coal or natural gas to keep the food cold and to run the lighting and all these kinds of things. It's us. We are the ones doing this. 8,000 million humans are the ones dumping waste gases into the atmosphere. So this guy is just full of shit. Does he know he's full of shit? I think he does. I think he just said these things, that it's the fossil fuel industries dumping their waste gases that's causing climate change. And it's just not true. They have no incentive to do that. They have every incentive to try and not do that. We are the ones doing that. And we have no incentive to stop doing that. We have no incentive to stop dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. I need the electricity for this house. I don't care where it comes from. I need it. I need the food in the market. I don't care how the food gets to the market. It's got to be there. If it ever stops being on the shelves, I'm fucked, okay? I need my car. I go to work. I drive my kids to school. I even have to go on vacation once in a while, okay? Cut me some slack. And I have to have these things. And if I don't have these things, I'm fucked. If I can't go to work, I don't have money, I can't pay my mortgage, I'm out on the streets. Me and my family, we're out on the streets, living under a bridge, begging for food. And where's that food coming from? Thousands of miles away, on a truck, on a diesel truck. Okay, so even when I lose my home and I lose everything, I'm still dependent on fossil fuels. I have to have this. Even homeless people have to have fossil fuels because they're living inside, they're embedded in a fossil fuel driven economy. And that's simply how it is. And this guy's full of shit. This is Yale Climate Connection. And he's saying, he's asking the question, what will it take for people to, demand action on climate change? And he finally comes to the answer that we never will. We never will. I happen to kind of agree with that. I happen to kind of not agree with that. Now he's quoting Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Now, how does that apply to people driving their cars? There is an effort to keep people from understanding, and this guy is engaging in it right here. This is narrative warfare. There is an effort right now to keep people from understanding that they are dependent on fossil fuels. He just did that. He's pushing all this on the fossil fuel company. They're perfectly fine with that. Go ahead and push it on us. If you ever try to convince people that it's their fault for demanding our services and our products, they'll cut your head off. The average person consuming fossil fuels doesn't want to understand, doesn't want to hear, doesn't want to be accused of causing the climate crisis. It's not that. It's global heating. We have to learn not to say that. Okay, it's not a climate crisis. You're going to find out. You're going to find out the hard way, to your utter dismay and horror, that when people start demanding changes to actions against the climate crisis, the answers they're going to get are just going to be like patting children on the head. Yes, well, that's very clever of you being concerned, but there's nothing we can do about the climate, and you're just going to have to go home and play with your toys. And they're just going to be horrified, because what they should have asked for was an end to fossil fuels. That's what they should have asked for. They should have gone to Congress and they should have said, leave fossil fuels on the ground with immediate effect. They're not going to do that. They're going to demand climate justice, and they're not going to get it. Or they'll get something, they'll get patted on the head and said, that's very clever of you. Now go home and play with your toys. And you'll never get what you actually need, which is an end to global heating, which means you have to leave fossil fuels on the ground. And this guy is just promulgating that false narrative, that it's the fossil fuel industry and you can continue burning all the fossil fuels you want to. It's the fossil fuel industry that's the problem. And if you just step back from that a second, just think, wait a minute. How am I okay burning fossil fuels, but they, the fossil fuel industry, are not okay pulling them out of the ground? You could have that aha moment on your own, but you're not going to. You need me to point that out to you, because you've been conditioned. There's so much propaganda on this point. Then unless someone comes along, like me, some stupid YouTuber comes along and says, he just said it's okay for you to burn fossil fuels because the fossil fuel industry is at fault. You believe that because you want to. That is the correct answer for you. That's the correct answer. And so here he is doing it. Let's look at this some more. Net zero carbon emissions is bullshit. 2050 is bullshit. We're going to be so done. We're going to be so, okay. We're going to be so done by 2050, for fuck's sake. We're going to be compost. Most of us will be compost. Most of us will be dog lunch by 2050. Civilization isn't going to survive the next 15 years, let alone, what would it be, 25 years? We're not going to survive 15 years, least of all 25. Stranded assets. He wants to leave fossil fuels in the ground. Does he actually say that? Okay, so here he's saying that, yes, I muted the video. Here he's saying that if the politicians were to demand, that fossil fuels be left in the ground, this would strand trillions of dollars in valuable assets. And that would be terrible for profits. And therefore, the fossil fuel industry won't let politicians have that conversation. That is not why this conversation isn't taking place. Because the fossil fuel industry would suddenly lose money if we made them leave the fossil fuels in the ground. The reason why we can't have that conversation has nothing to do with the stranded assets. It has everything to do with if people don't have fossil fuels to survive every single fucking day, they will fucking die. I don't know how else to say it. And politicians know exactly what'll happen. And they are fracking, and they are subsidizing, and they are building pipelines, and they are scrambling around trying to get the last of the fossil fuels for their people. So if they can have the gas and the diesel and the jet fuel to do all the fun, amazing, magical things that they do, including eat. And treat your sewer and deliver the water to the taps so you can turn the taps and the water comes out. All of that, 100% of everything. 100% of everything you can see in the room around you. 100% of everything you do every day, including every thought you have ever had since you were probably 5 years old, is dependent on fossil fuels. This is the water that you swim in like a fish. It is completely invisible to you. And without it, like a fish out of water, you would die. And you would die quickly. And the politicians know that. They're not stupid. And the fossil fuel industry knows that. And they're not stupid either. And so the two of them are just walking down this primrose path together, trying to keep people from figuring out as long as possible why they have a climate crisis, why the planet is heating. They are going to keep you in the dark for as long as they can, not out of some deep, dark, evil conspiracy, but because they're trying to keep you alive. And they don't want you to lose your fucking mind, because that's what people are going to do. When people finally realize that the source of all the global heating is themselves, they're going to lose their minds. There are enough weak-minded people out there that when they hear that, it will just be violence from one end of the planet to the other. Violence. Because one of the things that people are going to realize, if people are the ones causing the climate crisis, and if people are the ones dependent on the fossil fuels, and if people are why we keep draining all the reservoirs of their oil and natural gas and digging up all the coal, if people are the reasons this shit show has to keep going, if people are the cause and people are the reason, then the problem is people. And if we had less people, then those of us that remain, how can I put this delicately? Then those of us that remain get to use all the fossil fuels they want. Am I right? I think I'm right. I mean, if the problem is people, really, dependent on fossil fuels, really, then let the dependencies continue for fewer people. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say something awkward? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just throw 8,000 million people under the bus? Sorry, not sorry. Yes, that's going to be the next shoe to drop. That's going to be the next shoe to drop. That's human nature. That's how humans are. I've got mine, and I'm important. And if the problem is there are too many people consuming fossil fuels to stay alive, then let's just unalive them. Oh, and by the way, see how this works. I just figured something out. We could unalive them by just taking away the fossil fuels or taking away the extra food that's been manufactured using fossil fuels and just let them figure it out. That's like the Marie Antoinette moment, right? We'll just let them eat cake. They'll be fine, won't they? And those of us that are important, well, we get to continue to have the fossil fuels, don't we? And isn't that how it should be? Because if the problem is people, not the nasty, profiteering, grasping capitalist fossil fuel industry, but it's really us'uns. If we, some of us more than others, are the problem, well then, solution. And that's where this is headed. They can't talk about the real problem. They can't talk about the source of the problem being people consuming fossil fuels. They can't do that. Because as soon as they do, then there's going to be then there's going to be people storming the capitals of all the great nations, all the leading, the G20, maybe even just the G7, storming the parliaments and the capitals of the leading nations, demanding that those other people not get any fossil fuels. Right? And the fossil fuel industry knows that day is coming, and the politicians know that day is coming, and they talk about it all the fucking time. How are we going to do this? How are we going to thread this needle? How are we going to do this? In the U.S., the weather is going to continue to get more extreme until we reach net zero emissions. I don't think that has anything to do with it. It's just going to get more extreme, period, okay? Trapping gases in the atmosphere, 10-year-long global warming is expected to surpass what is, 1.5 and then 2.0 above pre-industrial in about 25 years. In my estimation, that will take a Category 3 hurricane level of devastation. And so what is the level of devastation that we need? And his answer is basically there is nothing. It's inconceivable that people will ever want climate action based on any kind of weather event. And he's right. He's right on that. Why is he right on that? He's probably right on that for the wrong reason. I'm going to go back to the beginning. He's right on that for the wrong reason. And he wants you to think that people will get used to the weather and they'll get used to the damage and they'll get used to the harm. And that it'll get worse and worse and worse and they won't notice. It's called boiling the frog, which is not really a thing, by the way. A frog will eventually jump out of hot water. But we have this meme now, this internet meme of boiling the frog. If you keep turning up the heat on the pot, on the stovetop, slowly, then you can actually boil the frog. It won't try to save itself. Frogs are smarter than that. So he's wrong about that. That's not why people, the boiling the frog, the turning up the weather extreme slowly is not why people won't revolt against the climate crisis. The reason they won't revolt against the climate crisis ever in the history of this entire shit show is because they can't have a situation where they are deprived their fossil fuels. Because the only solution, it's not even a solution, the only response to global heating is to leave fossil fuels in the ground with immediate effect. Global heating is caused by the enhancements to the greenhouse effect, which is caused by excess CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, which remain there for thousands of years. The excess CO2 comes from us burning fossil fuels, and we need to burn fossil fuels to survive. So there you go. That's it. That's the whole thing. And therefore, because of that last point, that we must burn fossil fuels to survive, that's our human habitat, that's modernity, that's food in the markets, that's you going to work and your kids going to school, that's all that, okay? Because all that has to happen forever, then we can't do anything about the climate crisis, which is actually global heating. So there you go. We can't do anything about it. It doesn't matter what the weather is. Oh, and by the way, someone will eventually point out, and we end up coming back to the same point in this narrative. Someone will eventually point out, well, if people live in places prone to severe weather, then that's their fault, and we don't even have to save them because we need to get people off of fossil fuels anyway. so that those of us who live in proper places that aren't in the way of the weather, that don't live in the coastal areas and don't live in areas that are getting all these floods and don't live in areas that are on fire all the time, those people made bad lifestyle choices. I'm being facetious here, okay? They didn't choose to be in the fire zone. They didn't say, excuse me, where are all the fires? Okay, that's where I want to go live. No one made that decision. They're probably living in places that are affordable. They're probably living in places that are away from other people. They're probably living in places that are really pretty most of the year. They like to be surrounded by nature. They like to be surrounded by forests or whatever. And so they're living there as a lifestyle choice, but not because of the fires and not because of the floods and not because of the tornadoes and not because of the hurricanes coming ashore. There's other reasons that they chose to live there. Maybe that's where the job was. Maybe that's where the work is. Maybe that's where the money is. That's the only thing they could afford. So they're living there. They didn't choose to live there because it's going to be a great ride when the storms come. So it's not a lifestyle choice. They're just trying to live like everybody else. But it's going to be put out there that, well, that's their choice. They chose to live there. And if they're getting killed by tornadoes, well, that's their choice. If they're being killed by coastal flooding during hurricanes, that's their choice. If they're being killed by heat waves that last for weeks and months, well, that's their choice. That's what people are going to say. And then they're going to say, and if they choose to stay there, then they choose to die. And that's not my fault. And besides which, we can't have 8,000 million people burning fossil fuels anymore. Because I'm burning fossil fuels, and I'm not going to stop. And there can't be 8,000 million people like me on the earth. We need fewer people like me on the earth. I am me, and I'm going to burn fossil fuels for all time, forever, for eternity, until I'm a withered husk in a casket somewhere. Okay, I'm going to burn fossil fuels every fucking day for everything I want to do. And this is my sacred American way of life, or my sacred German way of life, or my sacred English way of life. And this is sacred to me. And I have to burn fossil fuels. All those other people can fucking die. Oh, and by the way, get on with it. That's where this is headed. So no, there's no extreme weather. Extreme weather? How about extreme fatality events? There's not going to be any extreme loss of life or weather or anything else that's going to ever dissuade people from driving and flying and buying expensive food at the market that came thousands of miles to be on their shelves. Nothing will ever stop that. Nothing will ever stop that. They will never stop. They will never stop. And it's not because of the fossil fuel industry, slipping us a fast one. It's not because of the greedy politicians taking the bribes. It's not because of the trillions of dollars in subsidies that we're never going to tackle global heating. We're never going to tackle global heating because we like our lifestyles. We want to burn fossil fuels. And anyone ever says we can't burn fossil fuels is going to have their head cut off. So there you go. That's the way it's going to be. Now, I said in the beginning that no, we are not going to, there's no, spoiler, right? I don't even care. You could just know this right up front. No, we will never stop burning fossil fuels on account of some extreme weather event. I did a calculation. I might even have it still here. I do. My notes from some video some weeks ago. If we were to pare down the human population by 8,000 million people in 20 years, well, it sounds like everybody, but it wouldn't be. I mean, it might be a 99% die-off or even a 99.9% die-off. Still leaves a lot of people, right? And these would be the elites. They would be the people who can afford the castles and the private jets and the private farms, right? They'd be doing really well. So by the time we get rid of the 20 million, tongue, please work, 8,000 million people. To do that over 20 years, which is extremely generous period of time, would be 400 million people per year annually. 400 million excess deaths annually. By whatever means we can do that. That's one United States of America. That's actually a bit over one United States of America annually for 20 years. Annually for 20 years. I even did a spreadsheet showing how this would really work. And I'm not going to bother bringing that up right now, the chart of how this would really work. But it's just a good rule of thumb, just to understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. 400 million people a year for 20 years solid would need to die before the rest of us, the proper people, the important people, the Marie Antoinettes of the world, could burn fossil fuels with impunity. And that's the target. That's actually the target. That's why we're never going to remove the subsidies for oil exploration. That's why we're never going to admonish the fossil fuel companies to stop extracting crude oil and natural gas. That's why we're never going to ever go to any citizen of any nation anywhere on the planet, anywhere, and tell them they can't burn fossil fuels in their private vehicle or in their food supply. We're never going to do that. No politician will ever do that, ever, in the history of ever. Their lips will never utter the words, stop burning fossil fuels. They will never say those words. But behind the scenes, they may engineer a situation simply by withholding support for nations with too many people. Just by withholding support, those people die. They die. Most of them die. And they'll be doing that in India. They'll be doing that in China. They'll be doing that in the industrialized world, not feeding the third world. They'll just stop feeding them. And no one will ever ask you or me or anybody in my neighborhood or anybody in my country, being the U.S., to stop driving, stop flying, and stop going to the market and buying mangoes from Mexico. That conversation will never take place. Never. There is no event that would ever cause that conversation to happen. And if there's a phenomenal food crisis in India that kills 2/3 of the population, 1 billion people die, and they die over 3-4 years, no one's going to say a word about that. And this is where you'll stand up and shout and rage and say, that is the cruelest thing I've ever heard. Watch it. Watch it happen. You're not going to do it either. You can be outraged now because I said the quiet part out loud, but in the end, you're not going to be outraged. You're going to say something like, everybody will do this. I'm not picking on you. Thank you for coming to my channel. I'm just saying you will do it too. You'll be surrounded by people saying this. And if nothing else, the peer pressure will cause you to agree that those were excess lives being maintained by fossil fuel availability for the food and the transportation and the medicines and everything else. And we have to stop burning fossil fuels. So it's unfortunately, they must be unalived. Yeah, I guess you're right. Because you'll be surrounded by people saying that. People have no qualms against saying that. They'll just come out and say it. In the same way that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are accusing Haitians in wherever it was, that little podunk town in wherever it was, of eating people's cats and dogs. A complete fabrication. They made it up. But they're perfectly happy saying it because it serves a narrative. Then people just make shit up all the time. And when the time comes and 2/3 of the Indian population dies over 3 or 4 years because of a famine, you'll say, yeah, well, those were excess people. We had too many people. And we kept them alive with fossil fuels, and that destroyed the planet. And so to keep the planet for the rest of us, the excess people must be unalived. And, sorry, but secretly it's sorry, not sorry, because you're trying to save yourself. Because you have to have the fossil fuels. And you would rather those people die so that you can keep the fossil fuels. And you'll be in a crowd of people saying the same thing. And you'll go, And you'll remember me saying this a few years before. And I want you to feel okay about that moment when that moment comes. Why? Everyone has an individual responsibility. And the individual responsibility you have is not to fight the climate crisis. Your individual responsibility is not to get every person on the planet off of fossil fuels to save as many people as possible. You might want to try that, but that's not your responsibility. Your individual responsibility is not to solve global heating. You can't do that. And I'm not going to burden you with the responsibility of doing that. Other people will, but I'm not going to burden you with that responsibility. Your responsibility is very simple. You have one responsibility. And humans have had the same responsibility for as long as humans have been on Earth. Every day, every hour, every time you get up, just before you go to bed, your responsibility that entire time, every second, every moment, every hour of every day of your life is very simple. To survive. Your responsibility is to survive. And I will add, because of evolution, to survive in order to reproduce. And then, because reproduction isn't quite enough, you have an additional responsibility to protect your offspring so they don't die until after you are dead. And then they replace you. And that's how this shit works. Your responsibility is to survive. long enough to reproduce and raise your offspring long enough that they become your replacements. That's your responsibility. Most people have done that. And most people who will watch this video have been successful at staying alive and reproducing. Okay, that's it. That's your only responsibility to the species, is to not die. And everyone is going to realize that at some point. Their responsibility is to not die. Don't die. And people who can't pull that off are going to die. And then the chances for the rest of us get a little bit easier. And that's going to be the calculus. That's going to be the math that people run in their head all the time, all the time. Let that other guy die to save the planet, and I'm going to survive to save the species. That family, that country, that entire part of the world must die so that I don't die. They die first. I survive the species because of me, because I got lucky or I was smart or I was rich or whatever. The species does not go extinct. That's the math. That's how this works. And if it sounds cold and evil, that's just how it is. I wish I could say something else, but that's it. And everything else you hear on the internet and in politics, debates, and all this kind of crap is going to sound unhinged until you understand that. And I made a video just a while back talking about Kamala Harris when the moderator asked her, what are you going to do about fighting the climate crisis? Of course, she didn't ask her what she's going to do about global heating. But what are you going to do? And Kamala Harris said, we're going to innovate. We're going to do this. And her last part of her answer was, and we're going to frack and we're going to produce more oil, and gasoline will never be cheaper. And that's unhinged. But it isn't. Because everybody has to have fossil fuels to survive. And so while she would like to address the climate crisis, she's not going to do so at the expense of getting people scared that she's going to cut off the fossil fuels. We're going to let those other people die. Those people are going to suffer and die. You, who are going to vote for me, I got your back. You're covered. You're not going to die. Those other people are going to die. And then the number of people consuming fossil fuels will go down. Faster the better. And the rest of us who survive, phew, I got lucky. Maybe. Okay, or maybe you live on the most powerful nation on earth with the most powerful military who can dictate who dies and who doesn't. Luck of a sort. So this guy saying all these things, he is promoting the propaganda that you're not the problem. It's the fossil fuel industry that's the problem. Even though they're producing something for you that you need to survive, you're not the problem. And the next shoe to drop will be, you're still not the problem. And actually, the fossil fuel industry is not the problem either. We recognize that. We're going to stop saying that. But it's those other people that are the problem. They're queuing that up. They're queuing that up. That's going to be the next shoe to drop. And what do I think about that? It's true. It's true. And my responsibility is to survive. Keep myself alive. I don't have any responsibility for anything else. And that's well, I'll just say it. That's savage. Well, guess what, folks? I'm a savage. But I'm not lying to myself. And I'm not lying to you. And I'm pointing out that you're being lied to. So I recommend you become a fucking savage. And you understand what is actually happening. That we are going to burn fossil fuels to the bitter end. And if that means that the rest of the world has to die so that we can continue doing that, then that is what is going to happen. And that is savage and heartless and cruel and whatever else, and unfair and unjust, and all the same, we're going to do it. We are going to do it. 4 square, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, going to do it. Always on, all the time, savagery. So get used to it. Embrace it. That's what's happening right now. When we're blaming the fossil fuel industry, pretty soon that will morph over to blaming those other people. Too many people. Those people over there in particular. Not me. I'm not too many. I'm the right kind of person. Those people, they got to figure their shit out. Oop, they couldn't figure it out fast enough. Well, now they're all dead. I guess that makes it easier for me. And that's how people are going to approach this. So I think I've beat that dead horse enough. Go watch this video and see how much of it you agree with. I'm pretty sure you'll agree with all of it. And that's fine. You just do that. And in the end, it doesn't matter what you or I think. And, certainly it doesn't matter what I think. But I'm on here to speak the truth. I'm on here to say what's real. And this video doesn't do it. It doesn't do it. Except when he says weather will never cause us to leave fossil fuels in the ground. That part is correct. He got it wrong as to why that's correct, but that part is correct. We will never allow any weather event or any fatality event. And the reason is because by the time those start happening, we will welcome the fatalities. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't you love this stuff? Don't you just love what I do here? Don't you just love this over-the-top, evil, truth calling? Don't you just love it? I mean, you shouldn't, but it's true. It's true. Embrace the truth then. Go with the truth. That's it. Just go with the truth. And don't let them kid you about what's really happening. I got things to do. I got a roof to work on. I got to see what my son is up to. See you next time.